A minute of listening, a lifetime of understanding. Have you ever wondered what life inside a nursing home is really like? Is it truly a place of safety and comfort? Or do hidden realities lie behind its walls, loneliness, strict routines, and a quiet loss of independence? For many older adults, moving into a nursing home isn't just about changing residences. It's a trade-off between care and freedom. But is this the only path? Are there better ways to age while maintaining independence and purpose? Today, we bring you 6 inspiring stories of seniors who defied expectations, chose their own way of living, and held onto the most important thing of all, control over their own lives. Story 1. The resilient old man. Mr. Bernard at 87, Mr. Bernard remained steadfast in his independence. His entire life, he believed that as long as I'm breathing, I'm in charge of my own life. Every morning, he started his day with a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just like life itself, he often joked. Then, he would take his usual walk around the neighborhood, stop by the local bakery to discuss current affairs with longtime friends, and return home to enjoy a historical novel in his favorite armchair. But, as the years passed, aches and pains began to slow him down, and getting around became more challenging. His family grew increasingly concerned and suggested that he move into a nursing home where he could receive 24/7 care. Bernard scoffed at the idea, saying, "I've managed to take care of myself for decades. Why would I stop now?" To him, moving into a nursing home was like surrendering his freedom, a freedom he had cherished all his life. He wasn't ready to give up his little garden, his peaceful mornings, or, most importantly, the simple pleasure of eating pastries whenever he pleased. Instead of resigning himself to a nursing home, Bernard found ways to adapt. He hired a housekeeper to assist with household chores, installed safety rails in his bathroom, and set up an emergency alert system. Every week, his daughter visited to take him grocery shopping and cook meals together. Thanks to these adjustments, he was able to continue living in the home he loved without sacrificing his independence. Bernard's story is a powerful reminder that aging doesn't mean losing control over your life. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will it be a life where you remain in charge of your own choices, or one where others decide everything for you in a nursing home? Story 2. The TikToker Grandma. Mrs. Agatha and the Ageless Dance moves at 78. Mrs. Agatha never believed that old age meant slowing down. One afternoon, she noticed her grandchildren glued to their phones, laughing at a video on TikTok. Curious, she leaned in and asked, "What's so funny? Show me." Lily, her 18-year-old granddaughter, turned to her and explained, "Grandma, this is TikTok. People make fun videos, dance, and even go live to chat with others." Mrs. Agatha raised an intrigued eyebrow. "So, can old folks join too?" Lily chuckled. "No one's stopping you, Grandma, but I've never seen anyone like you do it before." And that was all the encouragement she needed. Her first video was simple, a short clip of her swaying to a song while baking in the kitchen. What happened next surprised everyone. Strangers started leaving comments. "Grandma, you're adorable. I wish my grandma was this cool." Seeing how much joy it brought, she thought to herself, "If people enjoy this, why not do more?" From then on, she tried something new each week. One day, she attempted a trendy dance challenge. Another day, she live-streamed herself, making her family's secret soup recipe. But what she loved most was getting her family involved. Her son helped her film cooking videos. Her granddaughter joined her in quick Q&A challenges, and even the elderly neighbor was convinced to co-host a live stream about plant care. Of course, not everyone approved. Some neighbors shook their heads, saying, "You're old. Just relax and stop acting like a teenager." But she simply laughed and replied, "Why not? I've never done this before. It's time to try." Mrs. Agatha's story is a reminder that age should never limit new experiences. Have you ever tried something you've never done before, like making TikTok videos, live streaming, or even dancing just for fun? Or will you sit back and let time quietly pass you by? Story 3. The Adventurous Grandpa. Mr. Henri and his cross-country road trip at 88. Mr. Henri had no plans to spend his remaining years sitting in an old armchair in the living room. He always believed that the world is vast and there's still time to explore. It all started when he saw a large map of the United States hanging on his grandson's wall. A thought crossed his mind. How far have I really gone in my life? As he retraced the places he had visited, he realized he had never truly traveled beyond his home state. Why not start now? No one in the family thought he was serious until they saw him pull out a notebook and start planning. Mr. Henri decided to embark on a cross-country road trip in his old pickup truck, not by plane or luxury cruise, but in the truck that had been with him for years, now transformed into his mobile home for the journey. His adventure began with a drive from New York to Chicago, where he indulged in the city's famous deep dish pizza and attended a jazz performance. In Texas, he rode a horse for the first time, a thrilling experience that almost ended with him falling off the saddle. By the time he reached California, he parked by the ocean, rolled down the windows, and let the salty breeze fill his lungs, feeling as if he was seeing the sea for the very first time. Of course, the trip wasn't always smooth. Hours behind the wheel left his back aching, and there were plenty of times he had to stop and ask for directions after getting lost. But to Henri, it was all part of the adventure. Growing old doesn't mean stopping your journey. As long as you remain curious, the world still has new things to show you. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will you keep seeking new experiences, or will you let age hold you back in your comfort zone? Story 4. The tech-savvy grandma, Mrs. Eleanor, and her smartphone journey at 80. Mrs. Eleanor always prided herself on not needing technology. Back in my day, we didn't have smartphones, and we got by just fine, she would say. To her, texting, video calls, and social media were things for the younger generation, while older folks should stick to reading newspapers, tending to their gardens, and enjoying a peaceful life. But one day, everything changed. Her granddaughter Emily moved to another city for work. They used to chat over tea every day, but now their conversations were limited to short phone calls. "Grandma, why don't you learn how to video call? That way, we can see each other," Emily suggested. At first, Eleanor immediately shook her head. "I don't know how to use those things. What if I press the wrong button?" But seeing the hope in her granddaughter's eyes, she decided to give it a try. With Emily's patient guidance, and after a few clumsy attempts, Mrs. Eleanor successfully made her first video call. When she saw her granddaughter's face appear on the screen, she laughed. "Now I finally understand why you kids are always glued to your phones." From that moment, Eleanor was no longer afraid of technology. She learned how to text her relatives, search for recipes online, and even saved a few light exercise tutorials for seniors. She didn't need to become a tech expert. Just knowing enough to stay connected with her loved ones was more than enough. Of course, there were times when she pressed the wrong button, sent blank messages, or accidentally started a video call at the most unexpected moments. But every time, she would laugh and say, "I may be old, but I'm still learning. You all need to be patient with me." Mrs. Eleanor's story reminds us that technology isn't a barrier. It's a gateway to new connections and experiences. Have you ever tried learning something you once thought was beyond your reach? Will you give it a try? Or will you let age keep you from enjoying the modern conveniences of today's world? Story 5. Mr. Lewis and the Garden of Memories. At 79, Mr. Lewis understood one thing. There are things you can lose and regain, but passion is not one of them. And for him, that passion was his beloved garden. For years, his mornings began with a hot cup of coffee in hand, stepping out to admire the flowers blooming and the leaves stretching toward the sunlight. There was no rush. Every plant, every petal carried a memory, a silent witness to the years he had spent nurturing them. But time did not just help his plants grow. It also slowed him down. His back ached more with every movement, and his knees creaked with a soft crack whenever he walked. Some mornings, he would barely finish watering the plants before having to pause, leaning against the railing, sighing at the betrayal of old age. "Dad, maybe it's time to take a break," his son suggested. "We could hire someone to take care of the garden, or just let it grow naturally." But how could he abandon the garden he had nurtured for decades? If his legs were not as steady, he would sit and tend to his plants. If his hands were weaker, he would find simpler plants to care for. He no longer had the strength to move heavy pots around, but he could still touch the delicate petals, still breathe in the fresh scent of the earth. So he adapted. He arranged small potted plants neatly on shelves, hung delicate flowers along the balcony, letting the breeze sway them gently. He no longer needed to bend down. Just a simple reach was enough to feel the cool leaves between his fingers. Sitting by his plants, sipping his morning coffee, watching the sunlight filter through the green canopy, he realized something. Gardening was never about size or space. It was about the joy of nurturing life. His garden was smaller now, but his happiness remained untouched. Because for Mr. Lewis, gardening wasn't just about growing plants. It was about planting joy and hope for the days ahead. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will you continue cherishing life's little joys? Or will you let time take away everything that once made you happy? Story 6. Mrs. Catherine and her decision to stay home at 86. Mrs. Catherine understood that her body was not what it used to be. The stairs seemed steeper, household chores felt heavier, and at times, the silence in her large home became more noticeable than ever. Her children worried and urged her to move into a nursing home where she would be well taken care of. "You'll have friends, round-the-clock nurses, and nothing to worry about anymore," they said. But Catherine simply smiled. "I don't want a place where my schedule is decided for me, where someone tells me when to eat, when to sleep. I want to be somewhere that still feels like home." To her, this house was not just walls and a roof. It was a lifetime of memories. It was where she and her late husband painted the living room together, where her children once ran through the hallways, where she had spent decades building a life filled with warmth and love. How could she leave all of that behind just because she was growing older? Of course, living alone was not always easy. But instead of letting age dictate her life, Mrs. Catherine chose to adapt. She asked her son to install railings along the stairs, put anti-slip mats around the house, and hired a housekeeper a few times a week to help with chores. She also joined a senior community group where she could share stories over tea, stay engaged, and continue building meaningful connections. Aging, for Mrs. Catherine, did not mean giving up on the things she cherished. It simply meant finding ways to hold on to them for as long as she could. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will you choose to keep control over your life? Or will you let others decide everything for you? Story 7. Mr. Victor and his journey back to memories at 85. Mr. Victor no longer had the strength for long trips like he once did. In his younger days, he had been an avid traveler, driving across small towns with his wife, discovering quiet little streets, and sitting for hours by the river just to listen to the gentle flow of water. But now, his legs were not as strong, and long journeys felt impossible. One day, while tidying up his bookshelf, he stumbled upon an old photo box, pictures capturing the beautiful moments he and his wife had shared on their travels. Memories flooded back, but this time, they didn't bring regret. Instead, they sparked an idea. If I can't go far, why not bring the journey to me? And so, Mr. Victor began traveling from the comfort of his own home. He asked his grandchildren to help him find videos of the places he had once visited, from the quiet streets of Paris to the golden wheat fields of Italy. Every morning, he would travel through the screen, sipping on a cup of coffee unique to each destination he had once explored. But he didn't stop there. He also recreated the flavors of his past adventures. One day, he asked his daughter-in-law to make a classic French apple tart. The next, he indulged in a sip of Italian wine. Every taste, every image brought him back to those cherished moments, not in longing, but in a new way of experiencing them all over again. Someone once asked him, "Doesn't it make you sad, not being able to visit those places in person?" He simply smiled, gazing out the window where the golden afternoon sun filtered through the leaves. The best part of a journey isn't the distance traveled, but the memories we carry. And those memories, we can relive them as many times as we want. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will you let the past remain as distant memories, or will you find a way to relive and cherish them in a meaningful way? Growing old doesn't mean accepting a confined life, following fixed schedules, and living within the four walls of a nursing home. These stories have shown that you can still take control of your life, even when age is no longer on your side. Have you ever thought about how you want to live when you grow old? Will it be a life of freedom, where you decide when to wake up, when to enjoy your morning coffee, when to take a walk in nature, and savor every moment on your own terms? Or will you let others plan your days for you, eating at scheduled times, sleeping by fixed rules, waiting for occasional visits in a place that no longer feels like home? Life doesn't have to shrink just because of age. You can still experience, learn, and enjoy the things you love if you dare to choose a different path. After hearing these stories, which one resonated with you the most? Was it Mrs. Agatha trying TikTok for the first time? Or did another character touch your heart? And where are you from? Share with us the story that left the biggest impression on you.